Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. Here we will go in depth with all the information you need to learn of Middle-earth and its amazing characters. From where does Sauron come from, to the origins of orcs, ents, and even follow the travels of our most beloved characters. So if you are a fan of this type of content regarding the history of Middle-earth, don't forget to subscribe for more. Also don't forget to turn on the bell notification to be notified whenever new content has been put up on our channel, Dwarves of Khazad-dûm. About 2 videos will be posted weekly, so don't forget to comment and give a like to let me know that you are enjoying this video. So to not take any more time, let's get back to our video. 19 rings were made, 3 rings for the elves, 7 rings for the dwarfs, and 9 rings for men. An additional ring, the One Ring, was forged by Sauron himself at Mount Doom. The 19 lesser rings were linked somehow to the power of the One, and were dependent on it. Their wearers could be controlled by the wearer of the One, and if the One was destroyed, their own powers would fade with the power of the rings under the One. Celebrimbor settled in Eregion in the Second Age and started dealing with the dwarfs of the realm of Khazad-dûm. In the year 1500 of the Second Age, Sauron, calling himself Anatar, Lord of Gifts, befriended the Noldor of Eregion. He claimed to be an emissary of the Valar, especially all, and instructed them in the art of ring-making. Celebrimbor distrusted him, but the smiths of Eregion were deceived. Under the guidance and instruction of Sauron, the smiths openly made rings to learn the craft. But unbeknownst to him, the craft taught by Sauron incorporated a binding magic into the rings. His Anatar Fana was unmasked before he could quite complete the plan, and unknown to him Celebrimbor made 3 rings for the greatest of the elves and totally without his input. It was because of this reason that the 3 could not be perverted or do harm to their bearers. Celebrimbor himself withstood Sauron on the steps of the great door of the Myrdain. But he was grappled and taken captive, and the house was ransacked. There Sauron took the 9 rings and other lesser works of the Myrdain, but the 7 and the 3 he could not find. Then Celebrimbor was put to torment, and Sauron learned from him where the 7 were bestowed. Concerning the 3 rings, Sauron could learn nothing from Celebrimbor, and he had him put to death. But he guessed the truth, that the 3 had been committed to elvish guardians, and that must mean to Galadriel and Gil-galad. It turned out only the 9 really worked as planned, bending and corrupting the minds of their human wearers. The Dwarf Lords didn't become wraiths like the Nazgul did, as they proved resistant to their corruption. Sauron's plan all along was to create a group of rings magically connected to his own ruling ring. These would first be distributed to the most powerful denizens of Middle-earth, and then he would spring his trap, wearing the Master One Ring to allow him to control their minds and so all the significant kingdoms in existence at that time. Gandalf mentions that the rings were given to the kings of the 7 dwarf houses: Durin's folk, Firebeards, Broadbeams, Ironfists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots. Each ring had a different effect on the wielder's personality. Each ring was named for their effect. In the dwarf tongue their names mean the healer, the discontented one, the joyous one, the sleeper, the hidden one, Sneezy, and Dopey. A man who gained possession of one of the 7 likely would have become a wraith, just as those who wore the 9 did. But the dwarfs had initially been made by the Valar all to be totally and utterly indomitable, tough beyond description, both physically and mentally. The dwarfs indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. Sauron, according to portions of the Silmarillion, was unable to force the dwarven bearers to submit to his will. It is believed that the dwarfs' natural hardiness, and the fact that it was only the more powerful dwarf lords who possessed them, made them resistant to Sauron's control. The rings could not even turn them invisible. They used their rings only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and an overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the profit of Sauron. The rings amplified their wearers' natural skills and desire for dominion, which as a consequence, made them greedy and exceedingly rich. The rings gave them the power to multiply whatever they mind. It is said that thanks to them the 7 hoards were made, and that at the foundation of each of the 7 hoards was a golden ring. Yet with the vast quantities of treasure, came vast quantities of grief. Dragons were forever attracted to gold because it is said Morgoth always liked gold. It's true that Middle-earth's dragons all seem to have an obsession with treasure. Though Smaug is mentioned as being especially greedy, there are at least 2 other specific examples of dragons hoarding treasure, Glorung and Scatha, as well as a vague mention that many dwarvish halls in the Grey Mountains had been attacked by dragons seeking treasure. And it's an odd quality for dragons to have, since they really can't gain anything from this treasure, with one possible exception, and here's the spoiler: it's mentioned in The Hobbit that, by lying on his treasure hoard, Smaug has managed to create a sort of armor for his relatively unprotected underbelly. But it doesn't sound as if this was really much of a motivating factor behind his greed, but rather a sort of bonus. Thorin describes their nature pretty well. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarfs, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever, unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bag, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. At the time of The Lord of the Rings, 4 rings had been consumed by dragonfire. The dwarf rings consumed by dragons were not destroyed, but Sauron had those dragons imprisoned and tortured in an attempt to recover the rings. The Ringdrakes, as they were called, were Hrymil Frostheart, who consumed Tinya, and the king of the eastern Gelruka dwarfs who bore it, Thostor the Rank, who consumed Tulsia, the ring of another house in Run, and Fingar the Greedy, a great worm of Angband who consumed Uria and Vonya, the rings of the Erd Luin kingdoms. 2 other rings of the eastern houses were reclaimed by Sauron, Toria and Sindia, the ring of Drasa's folk, later dubbed Stoutaxes, who called it Manthrith. The only ring about which much is said is the ring of Durin's folk. The ring of Thror, the mightiest of the 7, was the first of the 7 dwarf rings to be forged, and the last to be recovered by Sauron. In Dwarven tradition, it was said Celebrimbor gave the ring to Durin III, king of Durin's folk, before the downfall of Eregin. Anya was the name of the ring of Durin, which was called Handorn by the dwarfs. It remained in the house of Durin for thousands of years until it was inherited by Thror, the king under the mountain. It was during Thror's reign that Smaug descended on Lonely Mountain and drove the dwarfs into exile. Long after his kingdom's destruction, Thror passed the ring to his son Thrain II, who dwelt for many years as an exile from his ancient home. At last, Thrain set out on an ill-fated quest to regain his kingdom, but he was captured by the spies of Sauron, and the ring of Thror was taken from him in Dol Guldur. Durin's ring was handed down his line, father to son, until it ended up with Thror, grandfather of Thorin Oakenshield. Thror, now old and desperate, gave to his son Thrain the one great treasure he still possessed, the last of the 7 rings, and then he went away with one old companion only called Nar. When Thror came to Moria, the gate was open. Nar begged him to beware, but he took no heed of him, and walked proudly in as an heir that returns. But he did not come back. Nar stayed nearby for many days in hiding. One day he heard a loud shout and the blare of a horn, and a body was flung out on the steps. Then Nar came up, and found that it was indeed the body of Thror, but the head was severed and lay face downwards. In response to his father's death, Thrain led Durin's folk to war against the Orcs of Moria. This war culminated in the Battle of Azanalbiza. It turns out that he was captured and imprisoned in Dol Guldur. Gandalf encountered him in the dungeons of the Necromancer, where he learned that Sauron had taken the ring back from him. Shortly before the outbreak of the War of the Ring, Sauron's envoy approached Dane II Ironfoot in the Lonely Mountain and offered to return the 3 surviving rings to the dwarfs, if they would help find the one ring. Dane refused, knowing from the dwarfs' long experience that Sauron was untrustworthy. By the time of the War of the Ring, 4 rings had been consumed by dragonfire and the rest reacquired by Sauron. Well friends, hope you had a great time with this video. Please comment and let us know what you thought of this story and give a like to help spread this content out there. If you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button for more lore of the world of Arda and Middle-earth.